Alrighty. I've made a mistake. It looks like Chapter 5 of the textbook overlaps Chapter 4, and I'm not sure I said that. Let me go back and look at our D2L. We'll hit Chapter 6 online and Chapter 5 of the text next. So we've done Chapter 4 already. So let's take a look at homework. We may add Chapter 5 to our exam because we've already covered the material. Let's make sure that the Chapter 5 work is stuff that we've already covered from online. So if you refresh your Dropbox, you'll see it. Scripting assignments 14 and 15. We're skipping 13. Alrighty. So, enter and test Chapter 5.read time. That's pretty easy. Enter the following salaryfunc.py on the last page and test it. Screenshot. Alright, so here's the code. That's not that much. It's only a page worth of code. So, it's a fairly long script. Carefully inspect the flowchart. Notice the following. It calculates a salary based on time and a half. Input is gathered by two functions, get hours and get wage. Those two functions rely upon the input positive number function. That one accepts two different values, prompt and zero allowed, a prompt to display, and a Boolean variable that indicates whether zero is acceptable or not. The program loops until acceptable numeric input is given. So I think what we'll do today is we'll go ahead and work on this input positive number function just to make sure that we're familiar with it. The rest of this is pretty easy. Calculate pay, you pass in two values, you get something back. Display output, where you pass in a salary and a bonus, it prints it out. And since you're not writing it yourself, it's not going to be too hard. So basically, I just want you to understand it. And I'm going to cover what this little bit, if underscore underscore name equals underscore underscore main, on Thursday. So here we go. Let's take a look at it. We can actually make this better than what it already is because this one does not do error handling. And we've learned how to do error handling with the try, except keywords. So let's look at it. What it does is we set a variable equal to -1. We print our prompt, which is passed in. We convert it to a float. If it's greater than 0 or x is equal to 0 and 0 allowed, return x. So what is this doing? This is just making sure that the number is greater than 0. Or if they set 0 allowed equal to true, it's okay for them to type in 0. But sometimes you won't want them to type in 0. How many items are you going to order? Don't order 0. Although it's always annoying if you're dealing with a cart online and it doesn't let you change that value to 0 so that you could wipe it out. Anyways, and so if they did type in an invalid value and 0 was allowed, it says error must be 0 or greater, else error input cannot be negative. So we can do that. We can crank this out pretty quickly. But I'm going to try to do it from memory rather than looking at that code. So I'm making a new file. I'm going to call it September 26. So the first thing I want is I'm going to call it input positive number. I think I just called it num. and it's going to take two parameters. It's going to take a prompt, which is the text that it displays to ask its question, and then it's going to take a variable, which is going to be set to either true or false. And if 0 is allowed, great, they can type in 0. If 0 isn't allowed, then they have to loop, fix it again. So let's just do this. Do while, excuse me, there is no do loop in this. While true, let's display our message and store the input. I'm going to use S as my input just because input returns a string. So input, and we're going to pass prompt in as our parameter. Excuse me, as our argument. It's a parameter here. Becomes an argument when we do that. Now we need to try to convert it to a float. So try this stuff. Value is equal to the float version of S. Exception. They didn't enter a number. We're going to print an error message. Print, your input was not a number. And if that happens, we're just going to continue the loop. Now remember, we talked about break and we talked about continue. Break jumps you out of the loop. What does continue do? Yeah, pushes you back up to the top of the loop. So it's going to print the message out. It's going to let them type in input again. So by the time we get to here, we should have a valid value. I'm curious as to whether I have to declare that variable beforehand before this works. But anyways, so if value is greater than 0, and you don't need the parentheses, then we absolutely know it's good. So I'm going to return that value. Elif, the value is equal to 0 and 0 is allowed. And you can always take out equal true because that's implied when you have a Boolean variable. But I'm just leaving it in there to be a little clearer. Then return the value. Otherwise, they didn't type in something that was greater, and they typed in a value that was too small. Either 0, but zeros weren't allowed, or it was negative. So one final else. Let's print an error message. Print, your input must be a positive number. Maybe we should have turned it, must be positive. Maybe we should have told them that from the beginning, but good enough. And now we are done. One thing I don't really like about this is I'm embedding returns in the middle rather than doing it at the end. And we could change that logic. We could do a return value at the very end. So I'm going to cut that and I'm going to replace it with a break. And I'm going to cut that and replace it with a break. So I took those returns out, and now I'm going to backspace all the way here, and I'm going to return the value. I prefer to only have one way out of a function rather than multiple ways, unless it makes the function clearer. In this case, I don't think it makes it clearer. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other in this case. What do you think? Do you like seeing the return statements right there? Or do you like seeing the breaks and then they jump down and do the return? You like the return at the bottom? Yeah, I like that better. Because what if you wanted to add a debug message, you know, print, this function is returning, or whatever. You'd only have to add that once. Okay, that's our input positive number function. Let's try it out. X is equal to input positive number, give me a number. And we're going to say that zeros are allowed. I'm going to go and take the space out here so I can fit everything on one page. And this one here. And then y is equal to input positive number. Give me another number greater than 0. And so since we want a number greater than 0, the 0 allowed has to be set to false. And then as your last statement, just print x comma y. Excuse me. I'm going to give this a quick whirl, make sure it works. Seems to be working. Okay, so let me bring the code back up. The difference between this one and the one in the slide, excuse me, in the assignment, is I combine this into a single if statement, I believe. And I did not use try and except. So it was a little bit lamer because the version in the assignment would crash if you typed in a non-numeric value. So this one's a better one. And this is the kind of thing that I tuck away and just store in a file somewhere, and then whenever I need to use user input, I just put it back into the function. You know, I put it into my new program. I don't even write it as an import. I just copy and paste it, which is kind of lazy. But you know, once you've written something that does input validation, then you may as well just use it over and over. You could write another one that just said input number and it doesn't check, you know, whether to see if it's greater than 0. All it would need to do is this stuff. Get the value and do an exception. All right, I'm going to try it out. I didn't add my print statements here. Print x comma y. All right, so give me a number 2030. Give me another number greater than 0. I'm going to type in -1. Your input must be positive. I'm going to type in 0. Your input must be positive. I'm going to type in garbage. Was not a number. Then I'm going to finally get tired of playing this game and I'm going to type in a positive number. Now, I should put a space here or a colon or something, you know, telling where the difference is. Okay, I'll come right there. Or I could print it and then let them type it on another line. I think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to like the way it looks better if I do this. Maybe not, but I'm going to put print prompt here and then take the prompt out of the input statement. See if I like it better. Then I'll walk around. All right, there. That way it doesn't, you know, look dumb, not have spaces after or between the prompt and the data. All right, guys, I don't remember where I was. I think that I had done this, right? And then I checked to make sure that everybody could do input positive number. I've commented those lines out, and I've added a few more functions. So pause as you need to. Here's the code that we've added. Define get wage. Wage is equal to input positive number, and it's okay. It's not okay to enter 0, so we set that flag equal to false. The next one, get hours, it's okay to have 0 hours, so our second argument was set to true. And then our third one is one where we pass in the number of hours, the numbers of hours and the wage, and we print that message out and we return. And this looks a little bit complicated, all of this stuff. I'm going to pare it down to its minimum. I'm going to take the dollar signs off. I'm going to put it back as I had it before I paused the recording. I forgot to unpause it. There, like that. %.2f times %.2f hours equals %.2f. And then we had a percent sign here, and we put our 3 arguments that fill in the placeholders here between parentheses, and we have a final parentheses. So pause that, type it in. Now the other chunk of code, we made another, and then save that, make sure that's good. Create another file, and in it we want to import the module we just made, which I called September 26. If you named it something else, do that file name. So from September 26 import star, that brings in all of the functions that are stored in this other file. And then we just call those 3 functions: get wage, get hours, and output, just like that. All right, hope that makes sense. Let me get the last 3 things here. Bring that up. Then I will wander around and make sure y'all are doing okay. So in general, writing functions, the syntax is, we've covered this, def, function name, and then arguments, 0 or more, and then if you're going to calculate a return value, you have to return that return value. If it's not going, and I'm just going to erase this quickly or it's not going to be part of the program. And then when you call it by its name. If you have to feed in any data here, you type it in. If you have more than one argument, you have to pass in, I have that backwards. This should have been called parameters. There we go. So these are the parameters which we're going to fill in with this argument. If I only have one, I only need to pass in one argument. If I had 2 params, param2, or excuse me, param1, param2, then I have to have 2 arguments down here to fill those. And if it's a so-called void function, you don't have to put a value there. And as a matter of fact, you don't need a return statement at all, as long as it's doing something in here. Print, func name called, like that. It's got to have something in it. If you have a colon and you don't have a next line after it that's indented, it'll give you a syntax error. But anyways, I like seeing the word return. Sometimes I leave it off for my void functions just to fit more code on the screen for y'all to see. All right, that's about enough of that. Yes, sir.
I get an issue with mine not learning to understand that.
All right, let me come look. Things to note: this import statement has to match the case of your other module, your other file exactly. You leave off the .py. I wish that you could include it. It doesn't like it. And lastly, if you put dots in your file name, like you do this, CIT, 1203 dot September dot whatever, it's not going to like that one bit. That's just what you learned. We weren't able to get that to work, and I don't know what you have to do to get that to work. It freaks when it hits the period. You could rename it with underscores, but it wouldn't work. All right, so that really is pretty much all we need to know in order for you to do the homework. Let's go and validate that, because that was the tutorial part of it. Let's go actually look at assignment 15 and make sure that that's the case. Writing functions. A volume gas law calculation. It's possible I gave some of my 1113 students the same thing. But y'all have to do this where you input how many liters of gas you have and it returns, no, vice versa. You enter the number of moles or grams and it returns the liters of gas. That sound familiar? Okay.
We did a bunch of calculations, but I don't know if we did that specifically.
Well, if so, we get to do it again. No, anyways, so requirements. You will complete a program that calculates the volume of gas, O2 as assumed, using a formula known as the ideal gas law. So the equation is P times V is equal to N times R times T. Now what are these values? Well, we list them here, don't we? Okay, P is pressure, as measured in atmospheres. V is the volume in liters, which is actually what the program must calculate. N is the quantity of gas expressed in moles. You're not going to actually have to figure out. Yeah, you will. You're going to type in the number of grams of oxygen you have, and it's going to calculate it by dividing it by 32. And then R is a constant. And then the T is the temperature expressed in Kelvin. Kelvin is very similar to Celsius, except it starts with absolute zero and only goes up, so you can't have a negative Kelvin temperature. So what are you going to do? You're going to ask for the pressure. You're going to ask for the number of grams of oxygen you have. You don't need to ask for R, it's constant. And then you're going to ask for the degree C, so that K can be calculated from it. Then you're going to plug those things into this equation. Now, by the way, this 32, if y'all have ever taken chemistry, you know how to calculate this stuff. But if you have O2, the reason that's equal to 32 is because on the periodic chart, then the atomic mass of oxygen
It's 15.99, but it's O2.
right, is essentially 16. And so if you have two of those molecules, it's essentially 32. If you wanted to do the same thing, but you wanted to do CO2, carbon dioxide, then you would take two oxygens, which would be 16 plus 16, and you would add on a carbon, wherever carbon is hiding.
So the left of oxygen. Two.
Right here, yeah. So it'd be 12 plus 16 plus 16. And if I ever want to expand this homework to make it more interesting, I'll make it to where you have to pick the element from a list. You know, do you want to do it for CO2? Do you want to do it for, you know, whatever? You know, methane, hydrogen, which is just H2. One of the noble gases like helium, which doesn't combine at all. All right, so anyways, should be a pretty easy assignment. Based on these instructions. So I provide you with a main code on the next page. I don't know why I do that. I ought to make you roll it all yourself. You need to write the three functions: input O2, input temperature, and C, and calculate gas volume. Help is available from here. Apparently I recorded a video in the past.
When you said earlier you get the atmosphere, I think above it, further up, it just says for input to input the it's like the volume.
Oh, assume P is equal to 1.
Right.
Okay, if you want, you could hard code it so that it bases it just on 1 atmosphere. Now, 1 atmosphere is, you know, about the air pressure you get at sea level. But if you're talking about, you know, Jupiter or something, you could have thousands upon thousands of atmospheres, you know, out there. So anyways, you can hard code P equal to 1, or you could ask them for it, whichever way you want to do it. And then I give you some code which you ought to be able to understand. I did stick this down here, unfortunately. I'm going to have to explain that. But just for now, know that the underscores around this thing, that underscore name and underscore main, these are double underscores. Score name, score is equal to score main, score. If you don't type it in like that, it's not going to work. If you can't get it to work, just comment out that line entirely and then backspace main so that it's the first thing. So you're going to take this code and you're going to modify it. If you really want to earn my respect, you could just write it all yourself, but I kind of wanted you to follow my ideas for functions. So if you want to. What I've done here is just set it up so that you get your input and assume pressure is equal to 1. Then we convert the units. We have to calculate the temperature and the number of moles. Then we have to perform the calculation, and then we print the results. So shouldn't be too hard for you to do. Looks like I had that paused after all. All right, let's go now. I'm assuming we still have time. No, we're almost out. going to go back to our chapter 6 online. Which is working with strings. And we'd already talked about it. A string is a list of characters, essentially. So you access a string by its index number, counting from 0 and going up to n minus 1, where n is the length of the string. If you want to go backwards, you can start out at -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6. You can traverse the string several different ways. You can use a while loop where you set an index counter, and as long as the length of the string, you print that character out. Give the string name, square braces, print the index. Now they're storing that in a temporary variable and then printing that out, and that's fine. Then you just better remember to increment the index like that. Is that the only way to print out a string? No, you can use a for variable in or for value in list syntax. Like this. For variable in list, but in this case the list is a string. Print that character out. That's a lot shorter than doing it this way. I'd recommend, unless you have a compelling reason otherwise, to just memorize that syntax. We talked about string slices. If you want to only pull out these 3 characters, you would specify I'm going to start at character 3. Excuse me, I'm going to start at character 0. And I'm going to go up to 1, up to 2, up to 3. So you put a 3 there. The way I think of it is you specify a starting position, then you think how many characters you're going past that, and add that to the starting position. So if we wanted this word, Python, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 characters long. And what's its starting position? 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's going to start at 6. It's 6 long, so its starting position is 6. 6 plus 6 is 12. You just kind of need to remember that the second digit in the slice better not include the end. Yeah, so if you say 0, 4, we're actually getting 0, 1, 2, and 3, which is 4 characters. Kind of deceptive, but you just have to know that. If you leave off the value before the colon, it assumes the beginning. If you leave off the value after the colon, it assumes the end. If you leave off both values, you make an entire copy of it. So strings are immutable, meaning that they cannot be changed. If you have a list, you can change one of the values in the list by using this syntax. And if you're used to dealing with arrays in Java or C++, you might think that you could change the value of the string. If we wanted to make that say Jello World and rather than hello, we would say, okay, I want my first character to be a J. No, it just flat out doesn't like that. So if you want to build a new copy of the string with a J there, you have to do something a little bit different. You have to say, okay, I want my new greeting to start with a J, and then I want the rest of it to start at the second character in the list and go to the end. So that would get Hello World, which we're tacking onto the J, so it would print Jello World. So looping and counting. You use loops to check for whatever condition you're looking for. If you want to count the number of periods in your string, you start at the beginning, you initialize a counter. Each time you find what you're looking for, you add 1 to that counter. I think we're just about ready to stop here. So that was a review of what we did on Thursday. However, the string functions I do not believe are going to be on this exam, so we'll just tuck them away in our head and continue working with them later. Yep, so that's where we'll start on Thursday. right here, string methods.